Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 3 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for the hot hatches of Gran Turismo 6. Now in this episode we're featuring a car which is less used than many of the other hot hatches such as the Delta, the Focus RS, the Golf, etc. A car which I'm sure does have fans among you guys and among the GT community in general. I know I'm certainly a fan of this car, but many people do seem to underlove, underappreciate and overlook this car in particular. And the car is the Alfa Romeo 147 GTA. This is the top of the line of Alfa Romeo's hatchback series. It's powered by a significantly larger engine than you'd usually have in a hot hatch. Most hot hatches tend to be around the 2 litre mark. Some are a bit more, some are a bit less. This car is a 3.2, so it's up there with the Golf R32. And it's also relatively unique in that this is a naturally aspirated hot hatch, and that is very rare. Most hot hatches by far are turbocharged. You have a few which may be supercharged, but most of them tend to be turbo, and with relatively few exceptions, such as this one, that are naturally aspirated. Now, being naturally aspirated has advantages, disadvantages, just like everything else. It means that, for one thing, the engine is under-stressed. That means it's not working as hard as a turbocharged engine. It means that you can have big, lazy torque thanks to the engine's size, and that the engine is much smoother. You don't have to wait for any kind of lag. The engine just does what you want it to do when you want it to do. But what does this car have to offer? Because it's got a big engine, but it's also front-wheel drive, so there's no point in having a huge amount of power or torque if you can't get it to the road. So what does this car have to offer fully tuned? Well, fully tuned it sits at 515 pp, so it is one of the lower hot hatches in terms of fully tuned pp. That is significantly lower than the Ford Focus RS, for instance, that we reviewed last time. Now, its power, fully tuned, is 414 brake horsepower, which for a naturally aspirated hatchback is a lot of power. The torque is, to be honest, not as high as I would have expected. It's 318 pound-feet. But again, perhaps not so surprising because it is an Italian car, and most Italian performance cars do tend to go for power and high revs rather than torque, especially in their petrol models. As far as weight, it's not the lightest of hot hatches, but it's definitely not heavy either. It weighs in at 1,113 kilos with the full weight loss package, which endows it with a power to weight ratio of 372 horsepower per tonne, which, although nowhere near the same as, say, the Ford Focus RS, is still very good considering that cars like the Ford Focus in particular, are extremely OP when it comes to their weight. This is a much more realistic interpretation of a hot hatch. But what does it have to offer in terms of performance? Because being good on paper is of course one thing and is completely different to being usable in reality. So what's it like to drive on the track? Well, overall it's very good. It is very quick. The top speed is well in excess of 200 miles per hour. Acceleration is very good, and you do feel that lazy power of the engine. Now, don't get me wrong, for those who are unfamiliar with referring to an engine as having lazy power, that may sound like a bad thing. Believe me, it's not. It means that the engine is never working as hard as it needs to, which means that reliability is much better and the car has much more accessible performance. In other words, you don't have to rag it so much. With this car, you can really feel that. The car is much more composed, much more laid back than something like a Focus RS or the like, or say a Megane R26 for instance, which is just a full-on hardcore track biased machine, whereas this car, yes, it's a hot hatch, but it also tries to have the creature comforts and luxury that you'd want from a daily driver. Now obviously that doesn't matter so much on the game, but it's still a nice thing to know about the car. As far as visuals, well, I personally think it's a good looking car. I can understand why people perhaps wouldn't. Alfa Romeo has a unique design style when it comes to some of their more mainstream models. But as far as hot hatches go, you have to admit it's relatively understated, and that's not just due to the colour. You can paint this car in pretty much any colour, and it is quite understated. There's no massive wings on the back, no crazy bonnet intakes or fancy stripes. It's just a classy looking, relatively understated motor. And I like vehicles like that because they're more of a sleeper car. Now in terms of overall potential, well, it's kind of good and not so good, because overall this car is very nice to drive. It has excellent handling, very good brakes, lots of grip, and it is definitely fast. But it's not really the best at anything that it does among the hot hatch category, and I think that's one of the main reasons why most people overlook it. Some cars can be excellent at everything, but because they're not necessarily the best at any particular thing, they get overlooked. And this car, I think, falls into that category, which is a shame because it is an excellent all-round car. It's just not necessarily the best at anything. It's not the most powerful, it's not the lightest, it doesn't have the best power to weight ratio, the highest top speed, the best acceleration, etc. That said though, it is a very good car, and for those who aren't necessarily completely focused on purely winning and lap times, this car is a great car to drive. Now, although I've said it's not necessarily a winner's car, you certainly can win races with it. It's a highly competitive car, and although it's not necessarily as light or as powerful as something like a Focus RS, it's also a much lower PP, which means that in its own way it is still a competitive car. So that's it for this review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.